Hi, so in this video, I'm going to be walking through how you can properly forecast gross profit from new customers, taking into account all of the gross costs that go into acquiring a new customer, the estimated new customer acquisition cost, as well as the lifetime value from our customers whenever we acquire a new one. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Kieran Finn. I run a 7-figure D2C e-commerce agency, and we have a lot of clients that are spending multiple 6 figures per month on advertising. So it's incredibly important that we do this correctly. So what we really want to do when we do this is we want to create a scenario in the future that we can look at and we can say, yes, this scenario will be profitable, that we are going to scale into. We have brands come to us all the time where they have scaled from whatever it is, 100K a month to 600K a month, and they have done that themselves or with another agency. And whilst they've been hitting what they think is their profitable NCPA goal or their whatever it is that they're tracking, whether it's NCPA or marketing efficiency ratio or whatever, they reach this final goal and they realize they're not making anywhere near as much profit as they expected, or even worse, which is unfortunately too common, is they're actually losing cash whilst they are at this scenario now that they thought was going to be very nice and profitable. So this spreadsheet here alleviates all of that. So I'm going to walk through this right now. So the very first thing that we need to know when we are doing this is our exact costs that go into gross per order, so that we can calculate a true break-even CPA. So there are a few different ways that we can do this, and we will sometimes change this depending on what the brand is. But what we want to do is we want to get pretty much every single cost that can go into me going onto the store now and buying one more product. So we don't want to be looking at fixed costs. We don't want to be looking at OPEX. We don't want to be looking at team. We don't want to be looking at agencies. Depending on the structure that the brand has, we also may not want to be looking at warehouse if it is fixed and if it is rent, for example. If the brand is renting a warehouse completely, we don't want to be looking at this. Because what we want to be looking at is if we're going to go on and we're going to sell 100 extra, 200 extra new customers, we're going to sell to those next month, is that going to increase that fixed cost? Probably not. If it's something that is going to be quickly changing and increasing as we go along, then we're going to want to include that in there. And when we do that, we can just look at the total cost that we pay for the warehouse or storage or whatever it is and divide that by the number of orders estimated that we're going to be getting to get a rough cost per order. So that's optional whether we want to include that, but all of these definitely should be included. So when we're looking at it, how this calculator works is we want to make sure we only edit the yellow cells, and we have here the average cost of the product in terms of what we're actually selling the product for. Okay, then we're going to include the average sales tax or VAT that we have to pay on this. For example, if we're in the UK, this is going to be 20%, which is very high, and we can't get that back, but it has to go to the government, unfortunately, and they will be taking all of that, which is a huge chunk that we need to include and account for, right? So we've got to account for this when we're looking at this. By the way, as it says here, if you're in a country like the UK, or you can claim back the VAT or the GST or the sales tax or whatever it is from things that you pay, then we're not going to include those here. So for example, in your cost of goods, if you're paying VAT on top of the cost of goods, then we're going to remove that before adding it into this calculator, because you can get that back if that is how it operates in the country that you're in, which in the UK, for example, it is. So we're going to include the cost of goods, so how much we are actually paying for those goods, so typically from a supplier, how much that costs us, the receiving cost, so that's basically the cost that we pay to get those goods that we buy from the supplier to our warehouse. So that includes the shipping, the freight, and import duties, anything like that. We're also going to include in transaction fees that we pay when a customer buys from us. So that's going to be anything like the Shopify payments, Klarna, Afterpay, PayPal if we're taking it through PayPal, whatever that might be. So something around 2.5% might make sense. Any pick and pack fees, so if you are using a 3PL, what it would be per order for the pick and pack. Any product packaging costs, this is anything in terms of the actual packaging that we put our product in, the box, the whatever else goes in there, the flyer, inlays, okay, whatever we put in there as well, we need to include that per order. If you pay total packaging costs per month, then again, just divide that by the number of average orders that you do, and the average number of orders that you do, and you'll be able to get a rough number here. The cost for you to then ship that product out to the customer, and then the return rate of anything here, okay? With this, depending on your niche, this will or will not have a big effect. So if you're in fashion, for example, it's usually very common that the return rate on fashion will be pretty high, especially if you are higher value fashion, it will be common. Okay, so you would definitely want to include this in here as well. If you're something like a supplement brand, then the return rate is probably going to be a lot lower because people returning supplements is a lot less common. So once we factor in all of these and we've got all of these costs in here, again, there's a couple more that we may want to add or may not, depending on the situation. And if there are, then we want to think of those and get those added in. Then we can start to get a break even. So here we can start to see what our gross profit per order is, what our true gross margin per order is. So we're not just looking at COGS here, we're looking at everything that goes into this, because it's very, very important that we do that. We've also got our gross break-even CPA from this, and then our gross break-even ROAS. So we know, cool, if I go on, and let's say in this scenario here, these numbers aren't random, half of these aren't filled in, but let's just say this is true, and it turns out our true total gross costs are 40% in this case, then we can be acquiring customers at a 1.67x, and we know for a fact that if we do that, we're not going to be losing cash, okay? Yes, we've got all the OPEX to cover. We can't operate the whole business on this, but this is just to know what our minimum break even is, so that we can be super sure. And all the numbers then that we look at are based around this number in terms of what our gross profit is and all this stuff, okay? So once we have this, and this is nice and clear, we can then move on to the second section, which is a very nice, juicy section here. What have I done here? Let me pause. This is, I must have accidentally changed this. We're back. I just accidentally overwritten one of the cells there, so that's fine. So when we have something like this, then we can start to forecast what this is going to look like. Okay, so here we've got some random numbers from when this was previously filled out, but in this scenario, this could actually happen, right? What we're looking at here is we can start to put in ad spend for different scenarios that we want to look at, as well as an estimated new customer acquisition cost. Okay, and when this is very, very good is when we sign a client and we start working with a new client, they will often have so what they have is they usually have a top-down goal, which is we're doing 5 mil a year now. We want to get to 10 mil a year. That's their top-down goal. They would usually have some kind of profit goal in there as well, in terms of we want to maintain the same marketing efficiency ratio, or we want to maintain the same profitability, or whatever, or a very slight drop is fine, etc., etc. So they usually have that. Then they also usually have a CPA goal or a ROAS goal or a marketing efficiency goal in terms of being there. But what gets lost in between that is the thing that actually is between this, because a lot that should go on in between this to go from top-down goal to then CPA goal. There's a middle part which is usually skipped. And what we find is when that middle part is skipped, this number here is kind of chosen without too much reasoning behind it. It's maybe based off of a rough gross cost that they may think they have, but they haven't really gone through something like this to really calculate the true number. So what we want to do as marketers is we want to take that top-down goal and go through this process here to make sure that this number at the bottom is accurate. And what we want to be able to do is we want to look at what do we need to achieve in terms of a CPA on new customers. How does that then tie in with what our lifetime value is going to be on those new customers? And then we can start to look at, okay, if we're acquiring this many new customers every month, and this is our lifetime value, and this is what the cohorts look like over 30 days, 90 days, 180 days, 365 days, then we can start to build a bit of a forecast and understand what's going on. And then the one thing we need to look at is this includes all of our variable costs. We then need to look at, cool, what would it look like if we're acquiring this many customers at this this return? And that's going to then give us this amount of variable costs. Is the gross profit left over after those variable costs enough to cover the OPEX at the sales volume we're looking at? And how much does that leave after the OPEX? And that's when we can really start to go deep into the growth consulting with a client and act like fractional CMOs to the brands we work with, so that we can start to understand, okay, fantastic, yes, this top-down goal that we've now broken down into a lower CPA goal is actually going to produce the scenario we want at the end, which is a nice, profitable, healthy scenario, and we're not going to end up in a position like many of the brands that come to us are, which is where they are unfortunately losing cash after scaling into a scenario which is not actually profitable, and it's not an ideal scenario that they would want. So how we look to do this is all of this is based off the CPA cost here, right, that we've worked out before. So what we want to do when we do this is start looking at different variables. So let's say, for example, the brand comes to us and say, hey, we're spending 50K now, and we need to get a 2.2x on new customers. That is what they might tell us is their goal. So the first thing we would do is we want to go, okay, does this goal make sense? Because where's this goal that you've given us, where's that going to take us? And what's that going to look like? And so we start to track everything here. So in this spreadsheet, you can put in the lifetime value based on cohorts. So in this example, these are similar numbers from a client, by the way, that came to us not long ago. So let's say the average order value is $200. And then after 90 days, an average customer is worth $250. And you can see this in the back end of Shopify. It's not too difficult. In the customer cohort analysis, you can find this. And let's say after 180 days, an average customer is worth $325. And then after 365 days, an average customer is worth $400. So this is probably going to be some kind of high ticket supplement brand, right? In this scenario. And so what we can start to look at is, cool, if we did spend 50K on new customers and we got a 2.2x new customer ROAS, right? And that meant 550 new customers. That would mean in scenario 1, which is this one, after 30 days, which is basically just the first order, essentially, we're not expecting a second order to come in within 30 days. We're going to make 16K gross profit after the ad spend and after the COGS. Hooray, fantastic. Then we can start to say, cool, what's this going to look like after 90 days when our lifetime value is actually then $250? Well, we're going to make 32.5K from those customers that we initially acquired in total after 90 days ago, right? After 180 days, that's going to turn into 57K gross profit. After 365 days, that's going to turn into 82K gross profit. Okay, so super nice and profitable. But then we can start to look, okay, what would happen if we spent 100 grand at a 1.8x? What would happen in this scenario, for example? Well, in the short term, we're actually less profitable. So instead of making 16K, we've made 8K. But then after 90 days, it's slightly more profitable. We've made 35K instead of 32.5. After 180 days, we've made 75K instead of 57K. After 365 days, we made 116K after 82K. So you can start to see and break down how this could make sense in terms of how much are we willing to pay to acquire a new customer to be able to understand how we can scale, right? Because we could be looking at scenarios like this, where maybe we have a 1.9, maybe we have a 1.8 here. Maybe we find we can continue scaling at a 1.8 pretty healthily for a while. And so then the question is, if the brand says, hey, we need to acquire at 2.2, but then we get capped at 50, and we could say, hey, would it make more sense to spend 50 grand and get a 2.2x on new customers, or spend 300 grand and get a 1.8 on new customers? And when we look at this, well, this is probably going to be pretty obvious in this case. But I mean, early on, the gross profit isn't that different. So from day one, the gross profit isn't too different. And in this scenario, they're going to have way more OPEX. It's going to be a lot more complexity. It's probably not going to make sense if we're just looking at the absolute gross profit right now on customers, because this is a lot less. But if we look at it after 90 days, here we've made 32K gross profit. Here we've made 105K gross profit. If we look at it after 180 days, we made 57K gross profit and 220K gross profit. If we look at it after 365 days, we made 82K gross profit. And we've made, let me move my head out the way, made 350K gross profit. So there's a huge difference in gross profit after all that time, right? But maybe we might be looking at it going, you know what, actually, we do predict we can get a 1.9 here, actually, right? And you can start to see what makes more sense and what we really want to shoot for. We can build this scenario to actually start to see what's going to make more sense, right? And we can start to compare these numbers and understand what this looks like and how this is going to look, okay? The other scenario is maybe you have a brand that doesn't have that good of a lifetime value. So maybe for these guys, it's $200 average order value. Maybe after 90 days, that's only $210 on average. Maybe after 180 days, that's only $250. And then maybe after 365, that's only $280, for example, right? And then we can start to see, well, in this case, it probably is going to make a lot more sense to acquire customers at a higher return. Because maybe here we can be getting a 3x, right, on new customers. And then maybe if we start spending 200K, this might, if I can type, maybe this might come down to 2.7, right? And we can start to see what makes more sense. Well, there's a lot more gross profit here for sure, okay? As we start to grow, yeah, it's still higher. But in terms of the lifetime value here, it's probably not going to make too much sense to start dropping considerably, right? If we're talking about getting up to 400K a month spend, but then we're dropping down to like a 1.8x ROAS on new customers, because the lifetime value isn't that strong, it's probably not going to make that much sense. So yeah, there's less profit on first month, so it doesn't make much sense. After 90 days, there's also a lot less profit, so it doesn't make much sense. After 180 days, a lot less gross profit, still doesn't make sense. After 365 days, a lot less gross profit, so it definitely doesn't make sense. If we're working with a supplement brand, right? So let's say this is more like this. Let's say it's like $80 on first order, okay? Still not bad for supplements. Let's say this is here because it's supplements. So it'd be very, very low. And let's say blah, blah, blah. This is also maybe lower. This might be lower. This will probably be lower as well. Probably would be more than 2, but whatever. Let's just say gross we're coming out at something where it's 75. Don't look at these numbers too closely. We'd get those more accurate, but let's say gross it is coming out to, I'd probably still be a bit higher, to be fair. Let's just put a random number in to get this higher. Let's just do something like this, okay? So let's say we're coming out with a 7% gross margin per order, and this is including out all the costs for a supplement brand. Could be pretty realistic here. Probably could even be higher for some brands, but here this would be a good thing to look at. So a lot of supplement brands will struggle to acquire very nicely profitable on first order. They might be able to spend something like 10K a month and get a healthy profit on first order. But if this is a very good, healthy supplement brand, on average, you're probably going to be seeing something like 3/4 of customers buying again within 90 days once. If it's a very good supplement brand that works and people like it, right? So that wouldn't be quite double. It would be probably something like this. So going from $80 average order value to $150 in terms of 90-day gross profit. From here, you might then get another 1 or 2 orders. And again, you might get some customer drop off. So you might be looking at something like whatever, 250 maybe, possibly could be. And then here could be again something like 380, something like that possibly, right? Depends on the brand, depends on how solid this product is and how much of a good customer experience they provide and how good they are with retention marketing, right, in terms of keeping these customers. So if we then have something like this, yeah, maybe we can spend 10 grand at the 2.5, but then when we start spending more, maybe it starts to drop to a 2, let's say, right? Because pretty common in the supplement industry. But what would it look like if we could spend 200K at a 1.9, or if we could start to spend whatever 500K at a 1.8? Does this here make more sense than this in this scenario? Well, that's what we need to look at. Okay, so or maybe let's go even lower on this. Should we go even lower just to see? See, this is so fun. This is how I spend my weekends. Is just going through random numbers like this on spreadsheets and be like, what makes sense? What's happening here? So let's take a look, right? Here, month 1, 30 days. Well, yes, gross profit is higher, but for the first month, probably not high enough to be able to handle an extra, the 9,000 new customers compared to 300. Probably not worth it in this scenario, right? If we look at it here, well, now the gross profit is starting to increase substantially. Let me actually move my head over here or something. Let me make it smaller because I'm blocking up a lot of these numbers. So maybe here, it might do because we're now making 500K gross profit within 90 days compared to the 22. So pretty juicy. But again, we want to consider how much this OPEX is going to increase to figure out in terms of the operational complexity of servicing this many customers, what it's going to look like. Is it nice and smooth back end? Is it going to be a headache? Are there going to be stock problems? Is customer service going to be a headache? Are we going to need multiple distribution centers across different countries to be able to sell this much, whatever it is, right? After 180 days, cool, we've actually made 1.1 mil gross profit here compared to 44K gross profit. So it is starting to look pretty juicy, all right? It's starting to look pretty juicy. Oh, look at this. Here we've made 2 mil gross profit, all right? And what we want to really be looking at is how does this compare to what the OPEX will look like if we have to be at this structure? And then we want to be able to build a future scenario based on this and see, cool, yeah, this does make sense, or it doesn't make sense. So where this is very important is, one, when we have a top-down goal, and the goal is we want to do X, we want to be at X revenue, we want to do whatever it is. That's a top-down goal that would usually come from the founders or exec team, typically. Then there's usually a marketing goal, which is CPA or ROAS or whatever. All of what's in the middle is lost. And we want to make sure that if we actually follow this marketing goal, we are going to hit their top-down goal and it makes sense for them. So we don't want to hit that top-down goal and hit the 10 mil rev and then find, hang on, we're unprofitable, or hang on, our margins are so small, this makes no sense. Or, oh, hang on, we were profitable, but now we've just had to massively upgrade our distribution center because of the increased volume, and now it's not. And maybe if we stayed slightly below that, that could have been way more profitable, could have saved up a nice chunk of profit, and then figured out what the next move might be, right? So there's a lot of different things that we want to take into account when doing this. But that's when it can be extremely, extremely valuable. The other thing is then being able to know how lifetime value fits in to our customers to know what new customer ROAS are actually happy paying for. And 9 times out of 10, when we actually break down the numbers, like our job as marketers is to find the best scenario, and then we need to be able to show to brands that we work with why it makes sense to actually follow this scenario. And if we just blindly say, nah, man, we don't need to acquire customers at a 2.5x. We need to acquire a 1.5x and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. They're just going to be like, they're not going to see it. And so we need to use something like this to be able to explain to them and go, yeah, look, guys, like, look at the gross profit numbers. This is just a random example. This one might not even make sense for the brand because we don't know, in this imaginary scenario, we don't know what their OPEX is. We don't know what their goals are really. Do they want to run this like a lifestyle brand and see high profit and just be doing under 8 figures a year and be pushing it for profit? Are they looking to grow this and see sustainable year-on-year growth that is then attractive to an acquirer and then look to sell? There's a lot of things that we can look into. And then that leads me nicely onto the third thing, actually, which is where we use something like this, is when we help clients with investment or acquisition options. So when we have when one of our clients is looking for investors or potential acquirers, one of our clients had a 9-figure exit late last year, and we helped them a lot with this specifically. There's a lot that we can do from a marketing side that can show the value of the business and show the potential value of an investment coming in. So if we can show something like this, we can say, look, our lifetime value is solid. This is very, very good. Right now we're acquiring customers at this. All we need is a marketing injection to be able to then increase the number of customers that we are acquiring, and be able to push this. It makes it a lot more attractive to an investor or potential acquirer when they can see that actually, the numbers do make sense. And this is going to be nicely profitable if we do start to grow it. And these customers are worth a lot. And now we can see exactly how much they're worth based on all the gross costs that we have, et cetera, et cetera. So, guys, I hope this is nice and valuable to you. If you have any questions on this, feel free to let me know. If you are an e-commerce brand also, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn or email or book a call on our website or wherever it might be. Happy to have a chat, see if we can help you with things like this too. And guys, I wish you the best of luck. I'll leave this to you. Feel free to have a scroll around my YouTube for some other cool videos, and we will speak very soon. Peace.